toughest place is punishing cell. Very small, dark, very cold room. They take away all clothes, 3 pieces of bread, 3 cups of water, uh, uh, nobody to talk to, nothing, of course, you cannot read, you cannot write, uh, and you are supposed to be kept not more than 15 days because it's dangerous for physically, but also mentally. I spent 405 days in the punishing cell. In prison, that is a good place, Lachazor B'Tshuva, to hear the voice of God, to feel that God of our people is with you, is supporting you.
Welcome to Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Chana Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today, we have an incredible guest, a guest that I'm sure you all know about. His name is Natan Sharansky, and he is a dissident from Russia. He's a refusenik from Russia. That's what he's known for. He's also on the Knesset in Israel. And we thank you so much for joining us and for making time for us today. Thank you so much, Natan.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. So first of all, can you tell us a little start with your childhood. For those who don't know your story, tell us a little about your story. I mean, by now it's so famous, but remind us.
Well, first of all, I'm not from Russia, I'm from the Soviet Union. And that was a big, big difference. Because Soviet Union was like the biggest probably empire in the world, the biggest dictatorship in the world, controlled 1/3 of the world. It's it had full control over the life and minds of 200 million Soviet citizens. It's controlled them by fear of being punished. And in order to have full control over the people, they wanted to make sure that there is no distraction. There is no religion. Religion is, as they were quoting Marx, opium for the people, poison. There should be no national loyalties, whether to Ukraine or to Georgia or to Armenia or any other dozens of republics. And definitely the Jews should not feel themselves connected to anybody outside of the borders of Soviet Union, what means to their people and to their state, and should have no connection to religion, of course. So as a result, I was already the second generation of absolutely assimilated Soviet Jews. I was born and grew up in Donetsk, Ukraine. Today it is the center of the war between Russia and Ukraine. Then nobody would even think for a moment it's one big Soviet empire. And I grew knowing nothing about my Jewishness, no religion, no synagogue, no language, no book in Hebrew, no place where you can buy such a book, no holidays, Purim, Pesach, it didn't exist in our lives, no Brit Milah, no Bar Mitzvah, nothing. The only really Jewish thing which was in our life was anti-Semitism. A lot of anti-Semitism, both in the street and the policy of Soviet Union. So all the discussions at home are about restrictions for Jews, about what kind of career you can do, what you cannot do. And the message of the parents was very clear. Because you're Jewish, by the way, what means you're Jewish? It means that the idea of your parents is written Jew. And because of this, you must be the best in your class, in mathematics or in physics or in chess or in music, doesn't matter in what. But that is the way of our survival. To be Jewish there is nothing positive. It's like to be born with some disease. And
So you looked at being Jewish as something very negative.
Well, it was a burden. It was like a disease.
Burden.
You were not looking for this, you got it. And now you have to know how to survive. And what is the medicine? The medicine is to be the best in your profession. That's the beginning of that. And in fact, that was until the 1967, when Six-Day War, and the result, Israel entered in our life through awful anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist, and in fact anti-Jewish propaganda in the Soviet Union. and you see how everybody looks on you and says, how you Jews did it. It was
Mhm.
such a humiliation for Soviet Union. It was such great victory for everybody who didn't like Soviet Union. And people around you think that it is connected to you. So you'll better understand what it means. That's when in the underground, really in the underground, we start reading about ourselves, about our history, and that's how we discovered our history and later our language, our country, and our faith.
So that was when you discovered some positive parts about Judaism.
Oh yeah, well then not only some positive ones, and then when you discover that in fact if you only make some switch in your mind, then you have a great history. You're part of great history, which begins not from Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, which starts
Mhm.
from Exodus from Egypt, and you have this great family of people, Jews from all over the world who are coming as tourists. They can be from New York, from Paris, from Sydney. They say, "Oh my God, your father is from Odessa, and my father is from Odessa. Everybody is from Odessa. We are family. We want to help you." And
Mhm.
so you discover you have a family. And above all this, you discover that you have a country which is ready to send airplanes to the end of the world, but to help. So the moment you discover this, you realize that you can have identity. And that only depends on you. That's
Mhm.
your choice. And then, together with the identity, you get the strength to say to the Soviet authority that really I don't want to live here. I want to go to Israel. And the moment you
Mhm.
say it, your life changes, your career is finished, you'll lose your job, you'll be searched, you'll be interrogated. But from that moment, you're a really free person. You say what you think, you do what you believe in, and then you feel yourself strong enough to challenge the empire.
So it's interesting because when you become so subjugated by them and they are trying to persecute you more because you want to leave, that's when you felt you were free.
Yeah, well, not because they started persecuting, but because I discovered the world to which I belong. And in that world, you really feel yourself, first of all, you're not alone, and you feel yourself free because that's something that they cannot get from you.
So
They,
how did you discover that?
well,
How did you discover your Jewish identity? How did you learn more about it? Like, what was it
well,
that made you?
first of all, you understand that there is something that God believes is yours, and you start reading in the underground books about Jewish history and
Mhm,
about Zionist history, and you'll be surprised such a book of, I would say, not anything special, Bobby Mice. It's
mhm,
Exodus of Leon Uris.
mhm,
And this book was making a revolution in our minds. You suddenly discover that your grandfathers, people from Russia, or Jews, when they were of your age, they were already building the state. And people who are fighting now for Israel, the people of Exodus, they are from age. And then soldiers who are standing near the wall in 1967, they are exactly of your age.
mhm.
Uh, and so you find out that there is such a great history that people of your age were doing, and you're dealing only with exams and so on. So first of
Right.
all, the first which is what is coming is that if you decide to be part of the great history, then
Wow.
you then you find out
So
that
then
it's all history. It's the whole civilization there. Yeah.
right. Wow. So you became what was called a refusenik because you tried to leave Israel, you tried to immigrate to Israel, and they refused.
Yeah, well, I became refusing and I became activist of the movement for the right of Jews to immigrate or to live as Jews, meaning having access to Jewish culture, religion, and so on. And then I also became involved in the general struggle for freedom, for human rights in the Soviet Union. So at some moment I became like activist and spokesman of these two movements, Zionist Jewish movement and human rights movement.
And
And
they
yeah,
imprisoned you because of that?
yeah, there were quite a few years of the struggle, and we kept connection with many Jewish communities through tourists mainly, or then you are developing relations with foreign journalists and diplomats, and all these connections, of course, are controlled by KGB, and KGB threatens me all the time. But we have really to make sure that the world, first of all, Jews, but the world knows about the fate of Jews here, about the fate of refugees, about the fate of the prisoners of Zion, those who are in prison. And that's what I was doing for a few years. And the KGB put like KGB tails, people of KGB who were following me in a very demonstrative way for a long time. And then they did what they threatened to do. They arrested me and accused in high treason.
Right. Wow. And what was that like? What was life like in prison and at one point even solitary confinement?
Well, it's not on one point. From 9 years
It was
that
for a long time.
from
Right.
9 years that I was in prison, I spent half of this time in the solitary confinement, but it wasn't the toughest place. The toughest place is punishing cell. Very small, dark, very cold room. They take away all clothes, 3 pieces of bread, 3 cups of water, nobody to talk to, nothing, of course, you cannot read, you cannot write, and you're supposed to be kept not more than 15 days because it's dangerous for physically, but also mentally. I spent 405 days in the punishing cell for so-called bad behavior or bad influence on the others, doesn't matter. But they tried, of course. All they wanted, by the way, though they accused me in high treason and threatened with death penalty, but all they wanted that I'll go publicly on the press conference, they'll condemn Zionism, condemn Israel, say that they are right. That's it. And then you'll be free because they didn't need my death. They needed to show to everybody and every Jew so that you cannot really resist to this power. You will have to accept what they're doing. And that's why they not only was a year and a half of interrogations with the threat of being sentenced to death, but after it, but they failed. All these years in prison, they tried to make my conditions tougher and tougher, hoping that at some moment I will do what they want me to do publicly.
And
That,
what and why didn't you? Why didn't you do that?
well,
What gave you the
because I was
strength? What gave
because
you the strength to
I,
resist?
uh, two things. First of all, I had the life of Soviet slave, and now I had the life of free Jew. And I understood what they want from me is to go back to Soviet slavery. And the life of free person is uh, much more enjoyable, let's put it this way. But of course, very early you have to understand that your aim is not physical survival, because if it is physical survival, it's all in their hands. Then they will know how to break you. Your aim has to be to stay free person as long as you are alive. So every day that you survived as a free person, it's another day of victory. So you overturn, instead of feeling that it's another day of hope to survive, and then you are really losing your strength. And so you are feeling all the time that you are victorious over them because you remain free person and they're not. But that's the first thing. But the second is feeling that whatever they're saying, and they say, of course, that you're alone, you're abandoned, people are afraid to mention your name, but you know, you will keep in your mind this image of the free world, of the Jewish people, of the state of Israel, of my wife and the friends, of all those Jewish activists that I was in contact. You try to imagine all the time how they continue to fight, and you convince yourself, even though you don't know anything, but you convince themselves that the fight of all the Jewish people continues, that they will never stop, and you cannot let them down by you should not stop resisting. That's how the moment you feel yourself again in the center of this great historic struggle, and you have the responsibility on one hand, on the other hand, you feel yourself free person and understand that you have to continue to fight for your right to stay a free person. These two things, your identity and your desire to be free, that's what
So I want to go a little bit more into each of these things because I think these are so fascinating. So it's fascinating to me that you say you felt that you were a free person. Here you're in Soviet Russia prison. You're an imprisoned man who cannot go and do what he wants to do, and yet you felt you were more free. You were free to live as a Jew this way. Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by free? I mean, obviously, physically, you weren't free. So, what kind of freedom did you feel you
Well,
had?
simply not to be all, to use simply high words. I'll give a simple example. I loved to tell to my interrogators and later to my prison guards anti-Soviet jokes. There were a lot of jokes and anecdotes about Soviet leaders because they were like inviting the jokes about their stupidity, that they're all square, that they are all primitive, that demagogues. So there was a lot of jokes, but it were like underground jokes and anecdotes. But I'm a free person. I'm telling them some very, very funny anecdote about Brezhnev, who was the leader of Soviet Union.
Mhm.
And I'm laughing because it's funny. And they're almost exploding from laughter, but they cannot, because especially one in the presence of the other, that will be the end of their career. So they have to start shouting on you, how dare you, only for this you can be sentenced to death. So, and then I tell them, you see, you want to laugh and you cannot. And you think I'm in prison? You're in prison. You're in prison because you're like marionettes. You can't afford to cry or to laugh when you feel and want to do it. So why I was doing it? Well, of course, I wanted to irritate them. It's clear they tried to irritate me. I tried to irritate them, but the most important to remind yourself what really freedom means. And that's on one hand. On the other hand, this
So, well,
still
what does freedom? What does freedom mean to you?
freedom means that you can live, and live means that you can say things that you uh, believe in and do things that you feel that you are morally right in
Mhm.
accordance with your identity. So not simply that I want to do whatever I want to do, but you discover your identity. You want to be part of this history. You want to be part of this people. You want to be part of this struggle. And as long as you're doing what you want to do, this you're a free person. That's how.
So your body's in jail, but your mind and your soul is free. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, and that is the real freedom. It's because
Mhm.
after all, physically, well, we all can be in different conditions. Sometimes more restricted, sometimes less restricted. Important thing is whether you continue to live and to think and to act in accordance with what you really believe in and what you want to do.
Mhm.
And because I had this experience of loyal Soviet citizens, and by the way, I can tell you when exactly I started this life of loyal Soviet citizen. I am 5 years old. Stalin dies, and my father tells me, a 5 years old boy, that you should remember all your life that at the time when we Jews were in a very big danger, he didn't go with me about doctors' trials, which were taking place, all the persecutions. He simply said, we Jews were in big uh, danger, and now we are saved. So you remember that miracle happened. He didn't tell me that he died on Purim, that his repressions were planned on Pesach. I don't know if he knew that it's Purim. I
Mhm.
definitely know what is Purim and Pesach, but that's how it happened. But he said me, don't tell it to anybody. Do what everyone does. And I go back to
Mhm.
my kindergarten and I cry together with all the children about death of Stalin. And we are
Mhm.
singing songs about the son of all the people, Stalin. And they have no idea who of these children is really crying and who is
Mhm.
crying like me, only pretending. And that is typical life of Soviet citizen. You do things which you officially are supposed to do, but you know that it's all lie. But the
Mhm.
real true life can be only in a small circle of friends. So that was the loyal Soviet life that I had. And then after 67, I became a free person. So, and it's very important to feel in prison that in fact you continue the same life of the free person. And of course, you continue this global struggle for Jewish people, that you felt yourself very much a part of it when you were activist and demonstrator and spokesman of your movement. And now, after all, what changed? You're a few miles away from that place and you are in KGB prison. But in terms of historical struggle, nothing changed. You continue it.
So you write a lot about the interconnectedness of the soul, and that's how you really, like, you thought about, and you just mentioned that you thought about the Jewish community outside, your wife Avital, and you thought about how that was going to, how they're rooting for you, they're hoping for you, they're trying for you, and that how do you see that interconnectedness with others?
First of all, prison and especially punishing cells is a very good place for this interconnection because uh, 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 there is no place for disagreement. There is no place for somebody telling you no, it's wrong. You speak directly to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and nobody saying no, you're speaking the wrong way, or you're
Mhm.
so. Uh, uh, but also, what's important that you feel connection first of all with the people who continue to fight, and you try to think how they are fighting now at this moment. But then you think about all those historical figures, that about all those stories which you discovered when you discovered your identity, and you try to imagine how King David continues to be in this situation, or Maccabim, and you feel really the passion of their struggle. And of course, it's famous story that when I finally got access to the psalm book, which Avital sent to me before my arrest, but I got it only 3 years later, together with the telegram from that my father passed away. And I decided to read this small psalm book until I understand it. I didn't know most of the words. I knew all very special words, of course, like 1,000 words. And I never learned where is the end and where is the beginning of the sentence in these texts. Uh, and so I, as a mathematician, simply try to analyze the text by hearing the word that I know, I compare it in every other place where it stands near the other words, and that's how I started understanding the phrases. And the first phrase from all the Tehillim, which I understood fully, there were 11 words in Hebrew, Gam ki elech bagay tzalmavet lo ira ra ki ata imadi. When you go through the shadow of valley of death, you'll fear no evil because I am with you. Thou, who is you? Who is with me? It can be King David, it can be my wife Avital, it can be Jewish people, it can be the state of Israel, all of them together. And we believe it cannot be accidental that from all these phrases, these hundreds of thousands of words, a million of letters, these are the first words that you really understood connections. Like they send you message. "Lo tirara ki ata imadi." So, and you feel, of course, connection with uh, all these people. And then even above this, when you do have an opportunity to read some book, you couldn't read, of course, books which were published abroad, but some classical books of the Greece or Rome, if it happens, if you are in the place where there is small library and they are permitting you to read this book, and you are reading about Socrates, who decided not to accept demands of the court and to die, or about Odysseus, who is full of curiosity and spirit of fighting. And somehow it is very easy for you to feel their passion and uh, their bravery and their non-compromising moral demands, and it's so easy to understand them, and you have this strange feeling that they're also interested that you'll continue their struggle. So
Mhm.
this was a good place to feel yourself really interconnected with
Did
many, many souls in the world, into the past and the
did
future.
right. I know you called your book "Fear No Evil" after those verses from Psalms. Did you feel that God was with you in the prison?
Oh yeah, well, as I said, the religion came the last. The first it was Zionism. Second, it
Mhm.
was history. Then it were like holidays. Then came tradition, and in prison that is a good place, Lahazor B'Tshuva, to hear the voice of God, to feel that God of our people is with you, is supporting you. Yeah, that was and here the psalm book sent by Avital was very appropriate.
Mhm. And how did you feel that God was with you? Did you feel like, "Why did he do this to you?" Or did you feel that he was
No,
supporting
no,
you?
that what he is the one who is connecting me to the past, to the future, to the history, and by this gives me the strength,
Mhm.
gives me the hope, shows me what's happening. That in the end, we as a people have very optimistic and there is no end. But the on every round, if our faith and our solidarity and our feeling of belonging, that what brings us victory. And all those enemies in the past disappeared, and that's what will happen with Soviet Empire. And this feeling that, first of all, rationally, not only we Jewish refusing, but we Soviet dissidents, human rights activists, as I said, I was connected to many of them. We rationally felt that that is an evil empire and it will be destroyed. But also, as a Jew who is part of this story, I felt spiritually that what will happen with this empire, that's exactly what happened with the Roma or with Nazi Germany.
Mm, mhm. I know Avital was very, very active in trying to get you out, and I know others as well. Did you have a connection with the Lubavitcher Rebbe?
Well, Avital did have some, she even spent a few days in his court with Rabbi Klein, I think,
Mhm.
because they invited her to be there when there were some very important connections were happening. And in fact, it was rabbis, people who sent a message to Avital when already Americans were warning Avital that something were this time very important negotiations are happening. Try not uh, to be in public in the next 2 or 3 weeks in order not to undermine. And at the same time, she got a call from the people of Rabbi that from his sources, he knows that this time it's serious. I have to say, before in the Soviet Union, as I said, we were absolutely disconnected. But as later I discovered when I was already actively fighting, there were some very small groups of Chabad, one in Tashkent and one in Moscow and Marina, Russia. Now it's a big center, but then it was a very small group of people who, in the most difficult moments, succeeded to keep their Jewishness. And I have to say that we became open to this world of Jewish interconnection only after 67. But even in Stalin's times, they were shlichim of rabbi, not like shlichim of today, of course,
Mhm.
but those who were coming and succeeded to have some contact. So these were like very small islands. I, for example, in Ukraine, in Donetsk, we had no idea about their existence,
Mm.
but it happened to be very important. Yeah.
Right. Wow. Interesting. And I guess the teachings of the Rebbe also inspired you later on.
Yeah, well, I look. I can't say that I was Talmid Chacham, but no,
Right.
I have to say that the world of Shlichim, and I then got to know Rav Kowalski and all his tremendous uh, enterprise of Shlichim, and of course, because I continued being involved later as a minister and then the head of Jewish agency, so in all this connection between Israel and Jewish diaspora, Of course, Shluchim of Rebbe in Russia, in Ukraine, already in my times, and late now that I dealt in the last 15 years, I deal a lot with American universities. And on my initiative, there are Israeli fellows, meaning that Shlichim of Israel of the universities. Their most important partner in all this are Shlichim Shel Chabad. And when I had complaints why in Russia, there are only Shlichim of Chabad. There are so many other movements. I say, you know what? If you're ready to have a Shaliach or Shaliach of Shabbat, Chabad, it does depend on me. I promise I will make sure that he will be sent on Shlichut. And they say, what it means, Shaliach of Chabad? I say, it means that you go to some God forbidden, forsaken place like Tambov or Kurili or something very, very far from Moscow, thousands of miles. And there are 20 Jews, and here comes young Shaliach with his wife and one kid. And 5 years after this, there are 100 Jews, and he has 3 kids. And 15 years, and when I came to 25 years, they said, we understand you. Because nobody had such an institution that people go and they stay all their life there, and they learn that language. They become part of Russia or Ukraine or Zanzibar, I also met, and live the life of this community and build their community. So that's really unique strength
Right.
of Chabad.
Interesting. I read that you wrote that you were a little sad when you were leaving the prison because there you felt such a sense, a depth of idealism for your cause, a depth of understanding of what freedom is. There was a very strong distinction, and you
Yeah,
were
well,
worried that
look,
you would lose that when you got freed. Could you explain that to us?
well, look, it was very short-lived feeling, but I remember how I myself was surprised. Just at the time when airplane took me from there, I still didn't know. They only when with the airplane we crossed the borders of the Soviet Union, they told me that I'm exiled from the Soviet Union. I'm simply taken from the prison, put in the big airplane on the Iron 4 KGB man. But I understand something very big is happening. And I sense that I'm leaving the world where I knew everything. I knew how to stay there independent, how to make the right choices. I felt myself like the king there because I, I was above this daily reality. I knew how to control it. And I am now taken to the world back where nothing is known. I don't know what will happen to me with my means, and I don't really know how to behave because now all the laws, all these rules which I put for myself, they are not relevant anymore. Well, look, you overcome these feelings very quickly because, after all, that's something that you're dreaming about. And but yeah, it's interesting feeling that you have become. Uh, Later when I became a minister 10 years later, and I was asked by some journalists, do you feel that you are now the minister? I said, so what? I was king once in Gulag. Now I'm all a minister.
Um, so I want to just quote from what you read. Only when we discover identity and begin to connect with it that we found that there is something more important than physical survival. What do you think is that more important than physical survival?
That's what I told, that while I was living as a loyal Soviet citizen, and my Jewishness meant for me only one thing, that you have to be the best in your profession. That's how you survive. And to think that maybe there are something like you don't have freedom, maybe you should fight for your freedom. You're not even thinking about it, because why to take risk when survival is the only aim? That you don't have any other aims. If you don't have identity, you simply want to continue living, and that's why you have to uh, make sure that you are protected from different threats, and your professional success, that is the beginning and the end of your life.
Mhm.
When you discover identity and you discover that there are things you want now to be inside this story, and you want to be inside this civilization. You want to be able to continue it. You want to be able to pass it then to your children, if hopefully you'll have them. So that's suddenly you have meaning in your life, which is different from survival, which is much bigger than survival. And that's why today, when I work a lot with the young students in the university, in fact, since the war started, I was already 8 times in America, mainly meeting with young people. And usually for these 20 years or 30 years that I'm dealing with this, I can say that every young Jewish boy or girl wants to change the world, wants tikkun olam. If you don't want to change the world, probably you're not Jewish, because that's. But and what I'm saying to them, tikkun olam it's a very difficult thing. It needs a lot of strength. But there is no other source of this strength uh, except from your identity. So if you really want to be strong, to change the world for the better, you have to be connected very, very deeply to your identity and to get your energy from there. And that's, of course, uh, that's understanding I got from our life in the Soviet Union, when we couldn't think about anything but survival. And then suddenly you feel yourself part of this great history. People, you want to join them, you want to join Israel. And that's how you start fighting. And these few dozens or few hundreds of Jews who start fighting, in the end, really change the world. And
Right.
Iron Curtain fell, and more than 1 million Jews left, Soviet Union disappeared, and the world is very different. And of course, there were millions who, in one another way, were working for this. But all this started from the fact that there was a group of Jews in Soviet Union who went back to their identity, and there were many Jews in the world who also went back to their family obligation and fought together with them for our freedom.
Right. So now after October 7th, it seems like we're in a similar situation to what you were then, fighting for our survival as Jews, fighting for our identity as Jews. What would you say if you could give words of inspiration or strength to the hostages or their families, what would you say to them?
Well, as to hostages, it's very important that when they're there, and they met with their families and with those who are already released, it's very important for them in this most difficult situation never to lose a belief that the Jews of the world and the state of Israel are fighting for them. And that's the only thing which can give them hope. It's belief in Netzach Israel, and that in the power of Jewish connection. In general, I have to say, after the 7th of October, which was big shock and big failure, and I think we are recovering now. We made a big progress. We brought back our military resilience. We brought back our high technological wars. We defeated most of our enemies. Some of the regimes disappeared. Some of the other regimes who threaten our existence are retreating. But in terms of what it did for the Jews of the world, what happened on the 8th of October, is no less meaningful, because many Jews in America, for example, in the universities for sure, discovered that the world that they thought is their ally is not. Most of Jews in America feel that they are liberal Jews, and almost every Jew wants to be liberal. I also believe that I'm liberal. But as liberal Jews, their closest allies are human rights organizations, are women's organizations, all those that are their partners in making the world better. And on the 8th of October, many of them not only didn't express any sympathy, but declared that is the beginning of the liberation. That's how colonial people are fighting for oppressed people are fighting for their liberation. And on the one hand, like we after Six-Day War discovered that you cannot really avoid your Jewishness. Young Jews in the universities who thought nothing about but simply studying, and suddenly they thought that they have nothing to do with Israel. Now they are reminded in the most cruel way, and they spend a lot of time in the universities, that for the world, for friends and for enemies, they are connected to Israel. That's first thing. And second, of course, many of them discovered that accepting that there is such a connection, insisting that Zionism is part of their identity, they can become really much more stronger. And that's exactly what's happening these days in Columbia University and in Harvard University. And in fact, in their letters, they're demanding that the society will recognize that Zionism is part of their identities. We are Jews, they write. We are Zionists. It's part of our identity. We demand from American administration and from the heads of the universities to protect our Jewish Zionist identity. That's a famous letter in Columbia. There's demands from the court in Harvard. And in fact, some compromises are taking place, very important now. So I think on one hand, it's huge tragedy. On the other hand, it's an opportunity to go back to your real roots, to your real allies in this world, and to this feeling of the family.
And to understand who we really are as Jews, because that's
Absolutely.
that it keeps reminding us, right?
And
I want to
in every
go ahead.
generation, we can't avoid it. We have to fight for our right to be Jews, to live in accordance with our identity, in the connection with our people, in connection with our history, with our community. We have to fight for this. It cannot be given for granted.
Right. I want to ask you a little personal question about you and Avital. How did it work with, you were away for so long. What was that like to be reunited with her? And did you drift apart at all in those so many years of separation?
Well, look, we were very strongly connected. It's this feeling, even though, let's say, for 9 years that I was in prison, I got 2 letters from her. I got many more from my mother, but because they were all confiscated. And in 9 years, I had 2 personal meetings with my mother. I never had meetings, of course, with my wife. Nobody would permit her to travel from Jerusalem. And so I did get some news, but I felt I really we are together. I felt every minute in my thoughts what she's doing every minute, and Avital also had very intense life of fighting, and we were part of the same struggle. So when we met, simply as Avital says, she left Soviet Union and came to Israel early in the morning, and then when I came and she came with me back to Israel, it was late evening. So she said, I felt it was like one long, long day. I have to thank you, but I really have to finish now. People came to me, and
Thank,
I have to. Okay,
thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
thank you.
Wow, that was such a privilege to be speaking to Natan Sharansky, the famous refusenik. In fact, his time was so limited that at the end he kind of left abruptly because he was called upon for an emergency meeting in Israel today. And he needed to leave for that. But I felt that it was just such a privilege to understand the mind behind all those years of suffering, what helped him to survive those years, the fear no evil that he writes about in his famous book, and how he really stayed sane despite those days and days of solitary confinement and horrific conditions. I found it so interesting how he speaks about how in prison, despite the fact that he was in terrible, terrible conditions with hardly any food, hardly any water, sometimes alone in solitary confinement for, I think he said 400 days, for hundreds of days on end. And yet he felt that he had a certain freedom there that he didn't have as just living a life of a Soviet citizen who was just told what to think and how to think. I found that it was so fascinating that this freedom that he felt in prison was just to be his own person, to be the identity, to understand who he was, to understand and connect to Jews from all the centuries, from all the generations before us, and to really discover there who he was and what his identity was. In fact, he spoke about how he discovered God in the prison in Russia, in former Soviet Union. That was where he discovered God and his connection to God and his connection to his people, and felt that interconnectedness of his people was what was helping him along in his journey. And it reminded me so much throughout the entire interview, he was talking how the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, spoke about how when he was threatened with a gun in prison, he looked at the official. He looked him right in the eye and he said, "That gun only scares people who believe in many gods and one world. But I believe in one God and more than one world, the world after as well." And it's only when you can see things with such clarity, when you can see that your situation is not about just the here and now, like Natan spoke about, how it wasn't just about survival, which is what he believed in when he was a little boy, that the whole point of our living is just survival. But when you get past that and you see meaning and purpose and your connection to generations of Jews from the past and your people and the world at large and God, of course, the deepest connection that he found in prison, then you get beyond the situation that's in your current situation, and it gives you the courage to keep on going. And I found that really, really fascinating. And perhaps that's a message that we can take to our own personal lives. You know, we often get caught up in the situation and the circumstances that are right now in the here and now. And perhaps if we can take a step back and see it from a bigger perspective, as the Rebbe often said, that a person should look at themselves as the world being a balance, and that one act that I do can actually tip the balance for good. It's even. Good and bad is even. And if I can just do that one act, I can really tip the balance in a positive way on a cosmic level for all of creation. And that I found such a powerful thought. If you enjoy watching these interviews, I hope that you are subscribed to Chabad.org/extraordinary. You can catch us on all podcast platforms. We love to hear from you. I'd love to hear, what were your thoughts? What did you find inspiring from this very inspiring interview with Natan Sharansky? And we love to hear your comments and your thoughts, what you thought about it, any future ideas. We love to hear it all. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of this extraordinary community.